Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 25 transfer plans. We're looking ahead towards potentially what is life like without Saka. Probably better than what life is like with Saka. But yeah, Game Week 24 has gone pretty well for me so far. I'm not on 63 points. I believe I'm on 74. I think that's Bruno's bonus points to come through, which was the 2 bonus points there. Multiply by 2. And we've got 2 players to play. 2 Sunderland players who are against Burnley at home. We did bring in Maguire for Nico O'Reilly, so that was what, net 1 point gain, 1 sort of transfer or 1 team value loss abstained from. I could have considered going for James Hill. I didn't go for James Hill because I kind of thought United were probably a slightly better defense. Revisiting the Fulham game and watching the Wolves game as well, because Junior Krupi actually ended up being my first auto sub. I actually thought the level of defenses probably weren't massively different. If you kind of, I guess, look at the context of the game, of course, United had probably 3rd best clean sheet odds in that week. If you take the penalty away, which obviously is not fair at times, right? Because it was a clear chance given from United. Similar sort of, or maybe even slightly less XGC concede from United. So not the worst defensive performance from them, but I think they did deserve to concede. So I don't feel too bad about that. But I think the same can be said with Wolves as well. I think Tolo Kadara had like a great tap-in chance that he got, which was actually saved by Petrovic. So fair play to that. But we move on. Maguire actually got DEFCON, which is positive, because I think something that I was thinking about with the transfer at least was that maybe he could be a slightly better DEFCONer going forwards. And Krupi Jr. as an auto sub is always really good. A couple of people questioned why I should play Krupi Jr. over Sobo, or why I had Sobo over Krupi Jr. I think part of that was because, I'm sort of pre-invested into Liverpool with the Ekitike play here. And I still really like Sobo from right back. I think a website that's really helpful at visualizing whether people actually perform similarly across different positions is actually Understat. So if you look at Understat and you kind of tweak the different positions of Szoboszlai this season, where he plays attacking mid right, technically right mid, or even, for example, in the 10, which is the AMC role, you'll actually notice that this season Sobo has, generally speaking, not been very productive in more attacking positions than he has been in more defensive positions. Now, he actually got DEFCON in this game, also creeped into the bonus, and could have got an assist. I know people don't like the assist rules in FPL in terms of they don't really understand the decisions, but I think it's quite clear. It's always 1 or 2, like 1 defensive touch, and you can get an assist this season, even if it doesn't look like a clear-cut assist. So what happened was, I think Nick Pope had just kind of parried the ball slightly on to Teo, who the ball had rebounded off to into a Konate shot, and that Konate shot rebounded into Teo again. So initially, it kind of looked like it was just 1 Pope touch, which made me think it was going to be an assist. As it turns out, of course, it wasn't. But that's another sort of set piece created chance from Liverpool again. So once again, sort of highlighting the value of Szoboszlai in a game like that. City were really unimpressive, I think, in the second half versus Tottenham. I think if anyone watched that game, we saw in the first half that Tottenham looked like a completely hapless team, and then they kind of shaped up into a 4, and then suddenly were able to play football again, and City just didn't really produce much in that second half. So I don't think City's fixed, and the thing and the theme that kind of rings true across this whole season is that we have defenders who are doing good. The DEFCON numbers have averaged higher this season than they were last, and it's become a bit of a set piecey league. Like Maguire, for example, the reason why I bought him was because of set pieces. He actually had 2 chances where Mbeumo had sort of put the ball in the air. Obviously, Casemiro scored from a set piece himself, but yeah, Maguire has plenty of chances with this United team, and I'm quite excited to sort of own him going forwards. And Raya and Gabriel got a clean sheet, whereas of course Saka didn't play, and we got an auto sub. Madueke in Saka's stead actually got a lot of goal contributions, so that was a bit annoying, but we move on. I think we got pretty fortunate with the Enzo buy there. Not in the sense that I think Enzo's a good pick. We've kind of said this all season long, like the underlying stats have been really good. The minutes have been really good. And I think the minutes under Liam Rosenior will continue to be good. But just in terms of, getting a goal late into the game, that's always going to feel really good in FPL and feel fortunate, I suppose. But that's kind of what you pay for in terms of having 95-minute type players. And I think Enzo is kind of moving into that stead at this moment in time for Chelsea. But what we can see still with Liam Rosenior is that I think he's still, when he can find the opportunity to rest certain players, he will try to do so. I don't think it's worked out so far where he's rested people. For example, Chalobah versus Napoli, good example there. Cucurella versus West Ham, and even Reece James to an extent. It just hasn't worked out so brilliantly. But of course, they have come back in all those games, so results so far have still been good for Chelsea, but it's just about putting your best foot forward in games at times. And for example, anyone who actually wants Chalobah in FPL wants also the defensive clean sheet to happen when you're playing a little bit more of a structured team as opposed to sort of your B string backline. And I think Maresca's done that a couple of times in previous seasons. I do question sometimes whether that's maybe pressure from the board and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of Chelsea for you right now. They still have a lot of world class attacking players that can kind of make a difference, especially coming off the bench, right? So Ekitike got a brace, which was lovely. Krupi continued his ball striking heroics. Something I want to touch on with Krupi Jr. is that, going back to the discussion was why I played Sobo is sometimes I know that he's only limited to play 65 minutes a match. And so it's always tricky to think, okay, what can actually realistically happen in 65 minutes for a player? Does he get the one shot that you need for him to score a goal? And for Krupi Jr., he's not even getting very consistently amazing chances. This is a player who has shown so far this season that he can strike from any position. And I think maybe that's the unique selling point of Krupi Jr. There's not many players in the Premier League that we can actually say are able to crack off long shots in this league and actually make them effective consistently. It's very hard to say that there's a sample in Krupi Jr. because he's only played, I think, maybe like 500 minutes in League 2 years ago. Then he played a full season in League 2 and got 22 goals or 23 goals. And now he's playing in the Premier League and effectively his full first top flight season. I think he's played 800 minutes in the Prem and has 8 goals. And I don't think people really think that he's been overperforming too much in terms of like what this level could be for him if we were to look back maybe in 5 years. I just think that because he's so highly touted as a prospect, I've actually watched some of his under 21 games in my free time in the international breaks because he tends to play for France U21. And I've seen highlights of him scoring. And I just think he is kind of like a generational striker of the ball, but it still doesn't always give me the confidence to say, I want to start this match or player rather every week in FPL because of course, little things like bonus, appearance points, etc. They all add up in FPL, and it's very hard to say when's the right time to play someone who plays 65 minutes a match and is potentially one of the best ball strikers in the Premier League. So always a tough situation there. Felt like I got the good bench order right for the rest of Richards and Anderson. Maguire at one point was actually on one bonus, so I think he's pretty good as a pick going forwards. I just would like to see, of course, with De Ligt coming back, what I would have to do. And then, of course, we need to talk about Saka and what I plan to do with my team. So having 2 players left on a Monday, I feel pretty good. Hopefully we can creep into the top 10K because we're right now top 15K. But I think not too many players really have even 1 player left. So having 2 players left seems like a pretty good advantage that can take me over the line. And I'm hoping it does. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me this week. And we can kind of jump into the team reviews for the fixture results this weekend. So from watching the football this week and most of the games, Brighton versus Everton, I can't say I watched, but I think just looking at the XG of the game, it is a bit interesting to kind of see Everton as a team right now in the state that they're at. I think just with the lack of depth within attacking positions, it just doesn't seem like they can produce many attacking returns. But of course, they still ultimately scored versus Brighton, which was unfortunate for anyone carrying Brighton defense. Leeds versus Arsenal. Leeds have probably actually stepped into a run of form that's pretty poor at this moment in time. Like Arsenal, I think, have been a very poor attack, but for both games this season, they've completely ravaged this Leeds team when they've gone head to head. Wolves versus Bournemouth, I think, is a little bit flattering towards Bournemouth because I think Wolves had plenty of chances within that game, as I mentioned. It was probably actually closer to a 1-1 type game, but then you can argue it's a bit of game state as well because Bournemouth were always in the lead within that match before any big chances happened for Wolves. So there's that argument. Chelsea, of course, came back versus West Ham, which was a game that I missed in real time, but I actually just ended up watching the highlights and sort of rewatching parts of the game. I think the main point to take away from this is that like Enzo for me is just an extremely solid pick, generally speaking, in FPL. And I think sometimes you just have to always give credit to, as I said, 95-minute players because Chelsea have so many threats, for example, but having someone who actually plays the full 95 minutes will always give you, more often than not the benefit of the doubt in terms of getting good returns. And it's a classic case of, I think this is a Chelsea that didn't put their best front foot forward in terms of the first half and the way that they set up. And part of that, I think, is, as I was sort of saying within my videos this week, I'm not so sure about how Liam Senior was invested into, let's say, this Arsenal match in the midweek here. And I think it seems like with the sort of benchings that he very much is invested in that match. So we'll see what happens there. That will completely change our mind in terms of the doubles as well. So I think to advise people who have role transfers, I think unless you're moving already into a Chelsea player and you feel like you can still jump on the Enzo boat, it makes too much sense to just wait to make transfers this week. And I'll talk about my transfer plans. But I can make my transfer plans, based on if Arsenal were to qualify versus if Chelsea were to qualify. So I think that's the most important thing for any manager to really think about in this match day. Plus, of course, a couple scenarios in terms of, what Saka's injury is like if you own Saka. So for me, I kind of have like almost 3 conundrums, I suppose. or 4, because it would be, what would I do if, let's say, Chelsea were to qualify and then Saka was still injured for a long time, that kind of thing. Liverpool versus Newcastle, I think it was just a very impressive Liverpool performance. I had to say, I haven't been super flattered by Newcastle this season, especially a lot of the away performances or just generally the performances in the Premier League. Defense, for the most part, is quite solid, but Liverpool, of course, were very good in this match. Ekitike, I absolutely adore him. Wirtz is clearly obviously in extremely hot form as well. But I guess the tricky thing with Liverpool is, does it make sense right now to still jump into more Liverpool, or does it maybe make more sense to just hold on to Liverpool assets if you have them and keep them for a little bit longer than you think, and then maybe invest into a Wirtz in Gameweek 28? That's kind of what I'm thinking about right now, because I think Wirtz clearly is, in exceptional form. And in my cheat sheets, I've kind of reflected that I think Wirtz is really, in a mood right now, if that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, he's probably someone that I'm eyeing up for Gameweek 28 for sure, especially since I don't think any of the Chelsea picks really need to be kept beyond Gameweek 27 in FPL. After Gameweek 27 happens, Chelsea are basically on one of the toughest schedules around, and I don't really think it makes sense to be that invested into Chelsea at that point on. You can probably think about offloading as many of your Chelsea picks as possible, and I think moving into Liverpool is probably the most advisable thing that I can say. For Aston Villa Brentford, I did not watch this game because I was watching United versus Fulham, but it's one of those classic cases where I think they were playing 10 versus 11, and actually Brentford somehow managed to steal a lead. But then Brentford were able to convert that into sort of making a dango for Collins substitution, and then of course they just kind of saw the game out whilst being under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I've heard that Rodgers had a pretty poor game, but I think you just move on from there. I mean, that's an unlucky game in the sense that Aston Villa have had very fortunate games this season as well, in their going their way. And so it will happen eventually that you have a game that goes, unfortunately, in your way. For Forest versus Crystal Palace, didn't see the red card situation there, but I think Crystal Palace had a solid game, but it's kind of not so meaningful when it's 10 versus 11 and you aren't really able to, I guess, critically take advantage of the match from the penalty on. But good information for Sarr in terms of him getting a penalty. So, my takeaways for this week is, of course, people need to address the Saka situation. I actually think Timber's minutes look much better and better for him being able to meet the double, because if you kind of look at when's the best opportunities where you can play White or rest Timber, I think it's in the FA Cup. And so Timber really, I think, is still an amazing pick in FPL. So, of course, as someone who's kind of eyeing up Saka as a transfer target out, I mean, Rice and Timber are the only options that are on my mind. And unfortunately, it's a bit restrictive with the Arsenal because we know so many other players kind of have fragile minutes. And unless, let's say, Saka's out for an extremely prolonged amount of time and we're absolutely certain of it, that's the only option that would kind of open up someone like a Madueke for me as a pick, and I still don't think I would go there. As far as Spurs and City, I thought that was a game of two halves. Kind of shocked that City were just weak in the second half in terms of like meeting the demands of the game, being able to kind of fight back in terms of what Spurs had to offer in the second half. Of course, I think they were very unfortunate with the way the first Solanke goal went, but just in terms of the context, of course, with our knowledge of how Spurs have been so poor this season, and City are kind of still in a title charge of their own or a challenge of their own, and not being able to sort of meet the demands of the game, you could probably argue it's always a bogey game for them. But yeah, I don't know. Was a bit disappointed with City, and I think ultimately I feel like they've always dropped off in second halves for any of the games that I've recently watched them in. So if I remember even the Wolves game, I felt like they kind of were pretty pedestrian in the second half of that game as well. So unfortunate, and I'm not sure if I'm in love with the City team strength right now, but you can say that for a lot of the Premier League teams because so many of them are susceptible to a poor result on a good day. Like this league title, this league title is not going to go towards teams playing up to 90 or 100 points, and that's simply I think the difficulty of just winning games in the Premier League as it stands right now. And Sunderland versus Burnley, we'll see what happens. Hopefully something nice for Sunderland, but we'll see how they do without Gurtrada, who hasn't been playing recently, but then also Granit Xhaka is still out. So the options that they have in the midfield aren't amazing, and I'm kind of hoping Lafay gets to play a little bit of a more adventurous role within this match, and we'll see if he can do things for us. But yeah, that's pretty much my sort of review of the weekend. I don't think there's too many takeaways, but I thought with West Ham, they still looked really brilliant for the first 50, 60 minutes. Like, that's not to take any credit away from their sort of performance in the first half. Bowen still looks great. Somerville clearly has hit a level here where I think he's a very consistent option. I mean, in a league where we are struggling to find goals from wingers, it's impressive that he is now in a pretty hot run of form. For the Brentford piece of things, I think with the Shadi red card, that really just makes Dango such an easy transfer to make on 27 or 28. I'm definitely eyeing him up from there. So lots of kind of options to shop from in the future. My only thing with City and Crystal Palace is I think the more we think about investing into them, as enticing as Sar might be, you're still staring at a blank Game Week 31 for these players. So unless you're planning to wildcard before the blank for whatever reason, it's kind of hard to believe that you'll be using free transfers for those players because they're also going to force the transfer out. Whereas, of course, if you bring in players like maybe a Dango, like you can carry someone like Dango into your wildcard 32 with no issues and no additional transfers needed. So something to think about in terms of where we use our transfers going forward. So now we're jumping into my transfer plans. I wanted to kind of detail how I would play the transfers out on multiple different scenarios. And I think let's just keep it simple because the reality is right now we're so close to a double Game Week 26. If you don't understand how the double Game Week 26 will unfold, effectively on Tuesday, Arsenal play versus Chelsea. Whatever team qualifies to the EFL Cup finals will have their Game Week 31 game brought forward into Game Week 26, which will give them a double. So if Arsenal advance, you get a double Game Week for Arsenal in Game Week 26. And that means that Arsenal will play Wolves on top of the game that they have versus Brentford. If you have Chelsea actually qualifying, which is very unlikely right now, and I think priced at around 10 to 15% per bookies, like for example, like SpreadX or Pinnacle, you could probably find that double game week for Chelsea will be an Everton match away from home and then also a Leeds at home match, which is already there, right? So that's going to be your double game week. And that makes Everton double, that makes Wolves double. From Wolves, I really think the only interesting player at this moment in time is still Mane. I have to say Mane is a very interesting player. I own Krupi. I've been fortunate to own Krupi, but I still think Mane is someone who actually is stringing everything along for this Wolves team every time I watch him. So I think I'm quite impressed by him. But I still think that he causes a problem in terms of whatever players you own right now for the double will also blank in Game Week 31. So if you're planning for a wildcard 32, which is kind of the strategy that I'm going for myself, it does complicate things later down the line with the lack of free transfers that I personally have available. Some people might have more, and that's obviously a different circumstance. But right now, I'm kind of waiting for Saka news. I think I'm kind of shocked that a player would not be able to play a game versus Leeds and then suddenly miraculously would be totally fine for a match 1 week later. Let's see what happens, but maybe Arteta, and this is the problem too, right? Arteta is going to be giving us news. So what does that really mean? I have a couple options. I'm going to take the assumption on the first transfer path here that Arsenal will qualify because it's a 90% chance. It makes more sense to spend some time on Arsenal qualifying. So let's just imagine that Chelsea and Everton don't happen as a double game week, right? So this would mean that Arsenal and Wolves are the double game week. I think that if Saka's fine, well, lucky me. I guess I don't have to really make any transfers, or if anything, I can do my original plan transfer, which is Enzo Afe into Mbemo. I really still like Mbemo's positioning. I know he's probably underscored, for example, compared to Cunha. I still really like Ahmad as well. I think his minutes are perfect. So I would just go into Mbemo in this situation here and just chill. I think having auto substitutions for this week will help as well, especially if Saka's not going to be able to play. Having Krupi Jr. as, once again, another auto sub for him could be something that I am relying upon for this game week 25 if I think that Saka is going to make it towards double game week 26 as well. I think that's something to kind of mention as being quite important, because if I feel like he might be shaky for Sunderland at home, but is going to be fine for the double game 26, I still think I follow along this path. And then I kind of persist with owning Saka up until game week 26. And then in game week 26, of course, we have a strong team anyway. So, moves don't need to be made. But then in game week 27, this is kind of where I think we probably should part ways with Saka here. I would rather move Saka into a cheaper midfielder at this point, and then actually just move Krupi Jr. into maybe like a Thiago. It's not ideal because this is sort of me moving Krupi Jr. into Thiago when Krupi Jr. has West Ham away. But I feel like this is such a good fixture run for Thiago, and Thiago is still ultimately better than Krupi, where it makes sense for me to do so. So if that's the play that I make, I probably just go out of Saka at this point in time. And for the midfielders you can shop from, I don't think I can touch Semenyo. I know he's still in very hot form. But I think I'm probably going to be shopping for someone like maybe even a Wirtz at this moment in time. But of course, he's a little bit too expensive. So, I'm still kind of gapped from Thiago here. It could be the case that maybe I also shop a little bit cheaper, as I said, for someone like Dango. It really just depends on what the other moves that I make, right? Because, for example, let's say if I choose to keep Krupi, then I can obviously just go for Thiago the week after, potentially, and just just bank on Krupi Jr. versus West Ham. Or I can just go Dango and Thiago and basically just, full send it on a week like this as well, where I think the team's really, really strong. I can justify making these types of moves here to get Thiago in the team. And this would sort of move me towards a 3-4-3 structure, but it's a very healthy structure where I feel like most weeks, anyways, there's always going to be one player on your team who just narrowly has a poor fixture. And without there being good enough premiums who play consistent enough Premier League minutes, I think this makes the most sense for my team if I'm, going to kind of persist with, selling Saka, not having faith in Palmer too much, and specifically also on Mo Salah. So this will also give me enough money to probably improve some of my defenders later down the line, where I can move away from players who kind of have like these tougher away fixtures into other players, or for example, even address the situation where De Ligt is back and Maguire has to be sold on my team. So that's transfer option number one. That's going to be if Saka's fine. If Saka's not fine, I think I need to go with two options, and presuming that Arsenal will still double. So I think Saka to Rice is one option. At the end of the day, this is something that I think is very passive. It gives me a lot of money in the bank, but probably at some point in time, I'm going to have to take a hit, with my team, and I think taking a hit on a week like this makes sense. However, if I go for Rice, it's basically saying that I'm going to be a little bit more passive here. Maybe go, into the next game week here in game week 26, maybe taking someone like Enzo Lefebvre out of my team, and then just going for maybe even like a Palmer potentially on game week 26, and then persisting with some sort of structure where I've got almost like two premiums in the midfield with, a Bruno and a Palmer. I'm not really sure if this is the team that I love the most, but I can see it working out quite well as long as Palmer's minutes hold out, and so far they have. Like, he played 90 minutes versus West Ham. I think a little bit due to game state because, of course, I think something I can say about Palmer is even if he's not at his absolute physical peak, the main difference between Palmer and some players like maybe a Garnacho and, I don't know, let's say a Gittins, for example, is that those types of players can be just brought off regardless of their fitness levels, because you just need someone who's a little bit maybe more intelligent at times, or just can be a bit more of a difference maker within circumstances when they're not playing at their best. Whereas Palmer, I think, is just very smart, presses intelligently, generally knows what the forward pass option is, and so, can stay on even in matches where I don't think he's giving himself 100% of the time to kind of extend versus West Ham. So that's maybe a Palmer path, but I think the third option is actually just taking a bit more of an aggressive hit. I kind of like the idea of not going for Rice. Rice is, I think, a strong pick, but then someone that I think coming out of game week 26 with the double game week there, that I probably would actually want to sell. So if I don't want Rice, I think I'll just rush towards Timber. So depending on Maguire and how I feel about him, I think I might just go send it all the way down to Timber. So this means that I'll go Timber, and then Saka will be Palmer or Mbumo. So the biggest question for me this week is, do I go for a Palmer or Mbumo? Because as you can see with the sort of fantasy football model, the interesting thing with Mbumo is that actually he's got slightly better predicted numbers for this West Ham game, and then of course worse numbers for when Palmer has Burnley at home. But if I trust Mbumo's minutes, and I think they're really good as they have been, which kind of proves the point that I've made about Mbumo and the early substitutions with the City and Arsenal matches. I didn't think that they were so obviously going to suggest future Mbumo substitutions that early, but I don't think his minutes are 90 minutes either, but maybe they're still better than Palmer's, and so I can go for Mbumo here. But I think I make that 50-50 choice of Mbumo versus Palmer, and maybe that's also just watching Palmer versus Arsenal, seeing how many minutes he's going to play there, what the impacts that will be on in terms of the league, what the impacts that will be on in terms of Burnley at home. For now, I think the safer pick is Mbumo, even though that kind of coughs up a lot of money for me. It's just that I don't really want run into a situation where suddenly Palmer is going to be out of a squad for a match, or I have complications there. And at the end of the day, Mbumo doesn't play Champions League, so the longer I hold him, the better I feel about him. Whereas Chelsea eventually will have to play Champions League football. So that's kind of the two paths there. Now, what happens if Chelsea and Everton actually end up doubling? So I think if Chelsea and Everton double, the easiest move for me to make this week is obviously just the Palmer move, but then I don't need to make the Timber move as well, right? So the one free transfer for me on this week will just be that. And then on game week 26, I feel like the easy option is to just move one of my defenders into Tarkowski at this point in time, right? So I don't think I'm necessarily going to keep a Chalobah, because if I go for Chalobah, effectively, sure, I'm sure Chalobah can get some sort of nuclear haul, but the big difference for me is at least Tarkowski is a much more consistent pick, I think, generally speaking, than Chalobah. I know the FPL points this season pretty much suggest that Chalobah and Tarkowski are neck and neck, and they're getting DEFCON every single week. But I just generally feel that I prefer the Everton defense than let's say the Chelsea defense. So if I was to sort of bet on the rest of the season, sort of clean sheets, I think I would be someone who would back Everton. And there's still, a sliver of a chance that Chalobah gets rested in certain games later down the line. Whereas I think with Tarkowski, that's probably not going to be the case. So that's kind of why I would just make a move for Tarkowski here. Taking hits, I think, is the biggest question for, what do we do with Double Game 26? Because possibly the rest of the field will have more picks than myself. So, for example, people will have players like NJ, which currently I don't have. And they might even have maybe the combination of Chalobah and Tarkowski. So I think, generally speaking, the field can get to probably what I would say is comfortably probably 4 to 5 Chelsea and Everton players. And I think at that point, that's probably enough for most teams. Will I be taking hits? That's kind of the question that I have in my mind. I think probably not. But then I tend to say this, and then suddenly, you see a double game week, you see 2 players or teams, for example, that have 2 home games with Everton, or just simply 2 games with Chelsea, and then you want to be more bought into it. As I said, I think I'll just be picking one defender. If I can kind of sneak into, let's say, getting an NJ in my team, I might consider it. But at this moment in time, I think I'm pretty relaxed, knowing that I'll probably have a slightly worse team than the field. The alternative would be if, let's say, I was unsure about my chip strategy for the rest of the season, or I felt like I could use a free hit. Maybe I could also free hit and give me 26. That's something that I haven't closed my eye on. If Chelsea and Everton end up being the double, I simply have only one Chelsea player now. My team is a bit of a car crash for that double, but outside of the double, I think it's a very functional team. So maybe it's also a case of me just saying, I've got a pretty good team outside of the double. Why ruin it by just going too deep into Everton players for a week, taking hits, etc.? I could maybe just free hit in this angle here and maybe just get the full maximum from Everton, the full maximum from Chelsea. At some point later in the season, I guess Arsenal will double. Not that it really, and maybe I could even change my wildcard plans around it. So that's something, we can think about as well, especially, to manage, for example, future blind game weeks and double game weeks. But I think for now, the simple strategy is just to go for a free hit here, or just simply go towards Palmer in Game Week 25. And that's all I have really on my mind for Chelsea and Everton. As I said, the hits will probably be more of a kind of 50-50 decision in terms of how much do I want to attack the game week. Part of that, I suppose, will also be predicated on, how well ranked am I? Do I feel like I need to play more defensive or more offensive? And what are the benefits of that? Like, for example, if I was looking at the rest of the field, if people actually didn't have that many Chelsea and Everton players, I'd probably be a bit more tempted to not take a hit just because I already know I'm sort of underinvested. But yeah, that's not perfect logic. It's just something that I'm thinking about right now as a manager. But that's kind of scenario number 3. And sure, if Saka was available, I think I still would make the kind of transfers that I'm suggesting here for a Chelsea and Everton double, unless, of course, I'm free hitting, right? So, of course, there's a situation where, let's say, if I plan to free hit, then maybe if Saka's fine, I don't go for Palmer. I still just go Lafay to Mbumo, and then suddenly I free hit, give me 26, and then I persist with this team going forwards. So that's the 4th sort of alternative path. But lots of sort of different dilemmas to think about. I'll try to timestamp these to make it a bit more clear. But thank you guys so much for watching. And, let's sort of kind of keep an open eye towards the EFL Cup and see how things unfold. And I hope you guys have the best of the rest of the week here with the Burnley versus Sunderland game, if you care about it. And I'll see you guys soon for more content.